The Werewolf and the News Ladies. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story for you from so long ago that I'm sure most of your viewers weren't even born yet. I'm about to tell you stuff that happened when I was a very young man, and I was working at my uncle's local TV station in a certain Dogman heavy Midwestern state. Some of us even called him the Dogman already way back then. Some of us who were born and raised locally, that is. The Dogman legend stretches back further than the loggers who claimed they invented the creature as an entertaining tall tale. No, the Dogman has been here for longer than the human race. That's a pretty long time. Now, my grandchildren are even more obnoxious than their parents were, and they seem to think that they invented a lot of things, like feminism. No, we already had feminism back in '72, only we called it women's lib or women's liberation. I was all for women's liberation. A few years prior to that, you had to marry a woman to get her in bed. Thanks to women's liberation, I didn't even have to remember a woman's name and I could still wind up in bed with her. It was truly a magical time. You think these kids today are gross? You should have seen my generation. At least before AIDS hit. We were like the Romans, believe me. So, my story is going to tie together the Midwestern Dogman and the sexual revolution, at least if you bear with this old man while I collect my thoughts. In those days, I was a young producer at the TV station, which sounds impressive, but just means that I ran around doing a lot of different kinds of work. One of my ideas that I got on the air, at least for a little while, was a news show starring 2 female reporters. That was a new thing at the time to have women on like Barbara Walters or whatever. Only I was a guy not yet 25, so I hired younger and prettier reporters than Barbara Walters. In those days, though, you weren't taken seriously as a newswoman unless you were kind of ugly or if you had a speech impediment or something weird like that. So my idea of 2 pretty women doing investigative reporting never really got off the ground back then. We did on-the-street interviews for a pilot episode of an evening news-fotainment show, although I don't think we used that term back then yet. We got a chance to do 3 or 4 pilot episodes and they all aired, but none of them got good ratings, supposedly. Everywhere I went with either or both of those 2 women for the next couple years, though, people recognized them from the TV. They remembered their names and everything, so I don't understand how that didn't translate into ratings. At any rate, I was dating one of them at the time when this story happened, and I'm currently still married to the other one. Let's call them Cagney and Lacey, since their initials were actually C and L. I had to explain these 2 ladies to you because it was actually the 2 of them who physically touched the Dogman. We were out in a tan VW van that was owned by the TV station, but it wasn't marked in any way so that you would know it was owned by them. It was Cagney and Lacey in the back with our cameraman riding shotgun up front and me driving. We had been shooting on-the-street interviews about some then-current subject like Watergate or women's lib or something, and now the 4 of us wanted to go out and get a few drinks. People still used to go to the bar and get plastered together as a matter of course in those days. Those were good times. On the way out of town to a particular bar that the girls wanted to check out, we ran over a nail and it blew out one of the rear tires. The cameraman and I got out and man, we were in a bad place to be stuck. It was dark. It was cold. And we were still out in the lane people had to drive in. There wasn't any room to pull off the road over there. We were right smack up against some trees. And there was a large, fenced-off, overgrown, vacant area on the other side of the street. The wind was blowing so hard that it was whistling, and I was shaking all over, as much from the cold as from the creepy vibe I was getting from that location. The cameraman and I were working in the back setting up flares to prevent anyone from driving into us, and then we got into the job of swapping out the tire for our spare. So we were in the back on the street side of the van, and unbeknownst to us, the 2 young news ladies had gotten out and were standing by their trees on the opposite side of us men. They were in the front of the van and we were in the back. So the 2 of us were focused on changing the tire when we hear the women making sweet noises up front. like baby sounds or something. I got jealous that maybe my girl was flirting with some man, so I stood up and peered around the van. That was when I saw what this whole story is about. That was when I saw the Dogman. So this was a two-legged critter. Big. His legs were bent like a dog's legs. The hind legs, I mean. But his were thick as telephone poles, and he looked like he walked upright all the time. We didn't see him walk on all fours that night, and I don't know if he ever did. I believe this was a creature that walked the way we humans do. It was definitely not a man, though. It had a head like a dog or a wolf, but with a mane around his head that reminded me of a lion's mane more than anything else. Its eyes were bright red, like bicycle reflectors or car taillights, and they were lit from inside, or at least they sure looked like they were. Even though the legs looked very canine, the arms looked humanoid and incredibly muscular. They ended in hands, albeit clawed hands. This was like a furry version of the Hulk, with a lion's mane. I remember the fur being gray all over. My wife, who admittedly got much closer, says that the face and the tall ears were sort of pink or Caucasian flesh-colored, and the fur, which started on the cheeks and did not cover the entire face, was a bluish-grayish combination of shades, and was kept very well groomed by the beast. I can attest to the fact that neither of the women complained of fleas later on. When I first saw this big thing, standing on the street and facing the woods and the two women, Hackney and Lacey had already made friends with it. The two women were both touching this thing on its nasty-looking head. They were patting it and cooing like it was the cutest baby puppy. It was a literal monster, bigger than me by well over a foot. That thing must have weighed as much as 2 men or 3. At this point, the cameraman, who was a little guy just about the size of the women, he stood up and came over, and he saw the thing there too. He whispers to me, he says, "That's a Michigan Dogman." I say, "No, that's a Wisconsin werewolf." So we both of us had heard legends about this thing, but neither of the ladies had. They had no idea of the reputation of this beast. It could have bitten their pretty hands off in one bite, I'm sure. But that Dogman, he didn't look like he had violence on his mind when he was looking at those women. In fact, from the way he was checking the two of them out, I got the impression there was a lot of man in that dog, if you know what I'm hinting at. Now, granted, Cagney and Lacey were a sight to see in those days. My wife still is, of course. But in those days, they got the wolf whistles from the men, so it shouldn't seem surprising that the Wolfman came along and found them just as pretty as the human wolves had. But Cagney and Lacey, they weren't seeing it as a sexual beast leering at them. They thought he was drooling because he was a canine, even if he was an upright one and his body resembled a circus sideshow strongman more than it resembled an ordinary pooch. It bent over so the girls could scratch the top of its head, and they thought that was so cute. Meanwhile, the beast was staring at their legs. That was the miniskirt era, and so he had a lot to look at. I started to get jealous, and I wanted to go over there and punch that Dogman. The camera guy had a more level head. He told me he was going to try and get some silent footage of the girls petting the monster. In those pre-video camera days, we shot on 16mm film. When we shot sound, we used a camera that recorded the sound onto the 16mm film in a way similar to how Super 8 sound film worked. But most of the time, if it was something happening like a house fire, we shot using the handheld silent 16mm camera that was operated by cranking it like a toy. So the cameraman walked toward the scene, coming at it from behind the monster and to its side. He was looking down at the camera and cranking it over and over and over again to wind it up. The Dogman heard this weird cranking sound and he turned and looked right at that cameraman. But before the guy even looked up, the Dogman had grabbed him and thrown him and the camera between the two ladies and down a ravine between the trees and the woods alongside the road. The cameraman was screaming as he got pretty banged up, falling down that incline in the dark. Then it was my turn to scream when I saw the Dogman turn and look at me, with eyes that looked like they were on fire inside. I had never seen anything like it. I still have nightmares that I'm outside on a cold night in the middle of nowhere, and suddenly the Dogman sees me there. It's the worst feeling. Just a terrible nightmare to have. So, like I was saying, the cameraman was screaming in the woods. I was screaming on the road. But the ladies? The ladies were still cooing to the Dogman. I guess I'm glad they were, because his fur was standing on end. He looked pretty agitated. He showed me his fangs, and they look longer than my hand. So if it took baby talk to save my life, then I'll have to deal with it. Cagney and Lacey were going to town, telling the Dogman how big and strong he was, and how much bigger he looked when his fur stood on end like that. The creature was eating it up. He clearly craved attention from my then-girlfriend and my future wife, just as much as all us human males did at that time. Some guys drove by right then, and they saw me, the van, the monster, and the two girls, and they screeched to a stop. Had the monster caught their attention? No, they were fans of the girls, and they called out to them from their car. It was almost as if there weren't a 7 or 8 foot tall man-eating Dogman monster standing between their car and the girls. Well, whether or not those healthy young men noticed the Dogman certainly noticed them, and it leapfrogged over the ladies and into the woods. A second or two later, I heard the cameraman scream again, as apparently the Dogman ran over him to make good his escape. While Cagney and Lacey were signing autographs on the guys' chests, I helped the cameraman out of the woods. He had failed to get any footage, but he had managed to save the camera from getting mashed up. It would have taken a lot to destroy that thing. It was made to be used in combat. But if anything could have destroyed it, that big bruiser of a Dogman could have. So neither of the women had heard of the Dogman or even of Bigfoot, if you can imagine. Those were simpler times, and monsters were more of something guys found interesting than girls. Of course, these days my wife likes to claim she's an expert on the Midwestern Dogman. After all, how many people can claim that they reached out and touched a real Wolfman?
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
The Dogman, Slobbered, on my meat. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this, but here I am, recounting the unbelievable tale of how a creature straight out of folklore managed to outsmart my security system and pilfer meat from my freezer. It sounds utterly absurd, I know, but what I experienced was beyond explanation. It all started a few weeks ago when I heard strange noises coming from downstairs. At first I dismissed it as the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling in for the night. However, the persistent scratching and thumping grew louder, unsettling my already frayed nerves. With a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, I decided to investigate. As I descended the stairs, an icy chill crept up through me, sending shivers down my arms. What I encountered next defied all logic and reason as far as I'm concerned. Standing in my kitchen was a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It stood tall on two legs, covered in fur, with piercing yellow eyes that seemed to gleam with intelligence. In that moment, I felt like I had stepped into a nightmare, but what struck me the most was how it had somehow bypassed my security system. As someone who prides myself on the latest technology safeguarding my home, witnessing this creature outsmart it was nothing short of baffling. I watched in stunned silence as it made its way to my freezer, deftly opening it and helping itself to the contents within. It didn't take long for me to realize that the meat I had stored was its target. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I was dealing with some kind of a meat thief. In a panic, I scrambled to make sense of this situation. How had it managed to disable my security system? What was this creature? Why was it raiding my freezer? Questions swirled in my mind, but one thing was for sure. I needed to find a way to protect myself and my home from whatever this thing was. Since that night, I can't sleep. I've been on high alert, taking every precaution to fortify my home and keep this mysterious intruder at bay. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that I'm no match for whatever this ancient force is that has set its sights on my humble abode. So here I am, haunted by the memory of that encounter, grappling with the terrifying realization that in the darkness of the night, there are things that defy explanation and lurk beyond the edge of reason. How do you use a modern security system to defeat an ancient menace? General Zod from the Phantom Zone has purchased a t-shirt from us, and so he becomes our executive producer for this episode. We'll tell you all about the General right after this word from the merch item he bought.
Find that link in the description, honey.
General Zod from the Phantom Zone. From one of our t-shirts to a ton. For its crimes against Krypton. In the comics, I guess, or maybe in that movie. But I digress. Thank you, General. Man of a man. Thank you, General. Bigger than man. Thank you, General. You are so great. And Superman never bought a t-shirt. So dead and great.
Thanks, Biggie, and thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.